Let's get centered. This week, voters had their say and they resoundingly voted against the Trump agenda. Our special guest is Rafael Bernal, who has covered the politics of Washington and Capitol Hill for The Hill and UPI. I'm Louis Miranda alongside Carl Meacham and Jeremy Murphy. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, it's a pleasure. I've been looking forward for this since you started the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So, we had a significant win for Democrats this week across the board. They won big races in gubernatorial elections in California and Virginia, and of course, in California's Prop 50. But they won smaller ones too. The Virginia legislature has swung significantly to Democrats. Court races in Pennsylvania and even in Miami, which has gone very red in recent years. A Democrat had the highest number, I believe it was 36%, and is heading to a December 9th runoff. And so let's start there. Rafa, what do you make of this results? And were you surprised by, Democrats were being looked at as if they were the Walking Dead just a few months ago, and suddenly they've got life again?
I mean, it kind of happens with every sort of electoral cycle, only this one was louder because it had un, unhinged and unfettered Trump at the center of it. This obviously, we've talked about plenty of the differences between Trump 1 and Trump 2. But I think the core difference and the core difference that made it look like this, that made this election seem surprising, although it really wasn't, is that Trump too came in with this idea that they had this broad mandate to do everything, to just fully Project 2025 from top to bottom, mass goons in the streets. I'm not even exaggerating. This sounds like and I'm just scratching the surface of it. So
Yeah.
this myth that they believe themselves about a full mandate was never, I mean, it was always a myth, it was always a lie. When they said it, most people didn't believe them, but then they acted as if it were true. So when the electorate comes back and says, a lot of people say, like, well, I didn't vote for this. Latinos in New Jersey say, I didn't vote for mass men on the streets. I voted for my 2019 economy back. Nobody should really be that surprised.
Yeah. And Jeremy, you're a New Yorker. Are you happy with Mamdanistan?
I'm yeah, you know what? He ran a better campaign. Cuomo was like this dystopian, like things are going to be so bad if he wins. And Mamdani was about positivity, and New Yorkers like to think ahead. They like to think, positively. So, Cuomo, I always call him the fun sponge. He's like, eat your green beans, and New Yorkers didn't want their green beans. um, but all this, like, the sky is falling. All these billionaires crying in their Gucci's. It's just like, they're threatening to leave. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye, leave. We don't want you, and take your atrocious billionaire towers with you.
He
Um,
did run a very Trumpian, Cuomo did. Cuomo ran a very Trump-like campaign. That
mhm.
was really interesting. It was very negative. It was like, I'm the only one who can save you from this kind of thing.
And he's so dour, and just like, Mamdani was like positive. And I think it was the night before the election, he went to a nightclub and they were blasting Alicia Keys, and everybody was singing with him. I mean, that's the kind of energy that you want in a mayor. I mean, Cuomo was probably asleep by 9 at the Carlisle.
Yeah. Rafa, what do you make of all of that with New York? And do you think that Republicans are going to get? They've been watering at the mouth to call every Democrat in the country a Mamdani or Mamdanista. I called it last week. Do you see that that's going to be effective?
So, I mean, they've already tried it, right? But they tried to call Mikie Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger's, Mamdani's, and it didn't, like, sure, it didn't work in Virginia and New Jersey. It might work in, statewide election in Mississippi. And even that's not guaranteed because even the Democrats had advances in the Mississippi legislature, and they broke the supermajority in the Senate. I think it shows us and it reminds us how much that kind of politics really is regional and local.
Mm.
Mamdani is unlikely. Well, first of all, he can never be president constitutionally, so not an issue there. But he's unlikely to ever be the national face of the Democratic Party for a lot of reasons, for a lot of the same reasons that AOC is having trouble or would have trouble getting there, or like Bill de Blasio was elected in New York as mayor, And then when he tried, I mean, his Democratic primary performance at a national level, well, we all know that didn't go very well. And
I had actually forgotten about it.
yeah, and and De Blasio was a perfectly normal candidate for New York, and it just doesn't work at a national level. I'm sure you can find a reverse version of somebody that's to Nebraska, or like I don't know if like Claire McCaskill would have been a good national candidate. She'd be to Missouri for progressives on the coast. Maybe but it doesn't. I don't see Mamdani as a revolution in the Democratic Party. I see him as a
Hmm.
really good campaigner and a really smart guy that really put down Eric Adams and Cuomo, which might have been to the betterment of the New York Democratic Party because they were kind of getting out of touch with that base specifically.
I don't
Yeah.
think that he'll ever be the boogeyman because no one can pronounce his name. I mean, I had trouble with it.
Well, and now we hear Nancy Pelosi is retiring, so they've traded boogeymen or women. Now that she's out of politics, she won't be running for reelection. Carl, I want to bring you in for the right of center perspective because the question of whether you tie yourself to Trump or not, I think, is still up in the air after this election. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the Virginia results, when you had a very strong um, success there on the part of the Democrat. And Winsome Earl Sears never really caught traction, but she also never really had a strong backing from Trump. He didn't even say her name during the campaign. You see this 57.2% to 42.6%
Yeah.
it results in Virginia. But then you look at New Jersey, and in New Jersey, you had a very different situation where Jack Ciattarelli, who was more moderate last time he ran, this was the third time he ran for governor, he was more distanced from Trump, and now he was very much running a very MAGA light, pro Trump agenda, and still lost here 56.3 to 43 points.
I think this was a performance referendum. I don't think this was ideological in any way. I think voters rewarded whoever felt whoever they felt was more laser focused on things like affordability and then just basic competence. I think that the folks that the Dems had, not just in the places that we're talking about, but all over the country, were just competent candidates. I think it did provide sort of two flavors of victory. I'd say I think the centrist governors that you were mentioning in Virginia and New Jersey, who promised stability and a transformational message in New York, sort of being a different sort of approach that promised rent freezes and free transit, sort of gave you sort of Baskin Robbins in many ways, right? If folks remember or don't remember, lots of flavors. You could
31.
pick. That's right. You could pick. So it's like different lanes, same destination, right? Make life less brutal. I think a lot of folks are kind of tired of the everyday sort of, brutal discussions and partisanship and battles, right? I think the Republicans have this issue that you highlighted, which is when Trump isn't on the ballot, the folks that are down ballot, as they say, just don't have the same appeal. It doesn't trickle down, and you know, Republicans are struggling
But
to.
was it just that it didn't trickle down or that he worked against them? Because his administration is
Yeah,
very unpopular, very low approval ratings, direction of the country is in the wrong direction, and a pretty large majority. So isn't it more than just not having the trickle down effect and more just working against them?
I think the shutdown was one issue. That I think Dems now are probably going to look at the shutdown and feel vindicated in taking that approach. I do think that his personality and what he's willing to do, and how he resonates with a large, a critical mass of Americans, is part of the reason why. I mean, he's an exceptional figure. I mean, you can like him or dislike him, but he does know how to play this game, right? I think Mamdani, in many ways, is similar. And I do think that popularity, the use of social media, even in his acceptance speech, I mean, it was just completely, it was very direct. I
It was
think that's
aggressive.
appealing. That's appealing to folks who share the viewpoint. The issue is that are the Democrats going to be able to keep this momentum? Is Mamdani going to be able to produce the things that he's promised? I think that's a different question. And the other issue is, Democrats have found an area or a subject that I think resonates with the American public, which is affordability. Are they going to get distracted with all of these issues of identity? That I think would be sort of dilute their message and their appeal to lots of folks. And that's, we're yet to see what happens.
Yeah.
Also, I think let's not forget Trump fatigue. We're not even a year in, and he's exhausted. But the man doesn't get old, but we do. And we're only what is it, 10 months in? So I think a lot of people see even voting for Republicans giving him, because he's trying to redraw maps to get more votes, and he's tinkering and everything. And I think people are starting to see if they vote for a Republican, they're giving him more power. And that's the last thing. I think people just want a breath from him.
I think there's a like a Trump matrix for elections, like separate from what Democrats have to do, and they still have to improve. Like this was great performance for Democrats, but like Latino outreach, for instance, still has there's a lot of space. But the Trump matrix is he on the ballot? Yes, no. And is he currently in power? Yes, no. And that second question, like every election that's come along, important election that's come along where he's been in power, whether 2018, obviously 2020, and this sort of preview of 2026, people have that Trump exhaustion very quickly because it's he's a very good showman and a very good presenter, and when he's out of power, it's easy to make him. It's easy for him to make people think that only he can make things better. But when he's in power, like everybody remembers how just exhausting it is. Like man just won't shut up, basically.
Yeah, well, when you're 6'3", 215, and just 5% body fat, you have the stamina to do that.
The
No, but I
healthiest
think
president in
the
the world.
Latino issue I think is critical, and I think this is a signal, but it has to be read carefully. I think that in Virginia, Spanberger, I think she matched or exceeded recent Democratic margins with Latino voters.
Yeah, she did better than Biden.
Right. So it shows that, there is a message that will resonate and turn people back. But the key is to stay disciplined on that message. And for 2026, Democrats earn Latino support with pragmatic approaches on economic relief and dignity on immigration. And I think Republicans are going to come back with security, and I think they're going to modify it to be less cruel.
Yeah, let's take through some of those facts. Manassas Park, Virginia, where Latinos are 46% of the population in Virginia, Democrats increased their share of the vote by 22 percentage points compared to November 2024. That's pretty big. As you said, Spanberger exceeded Biden's numbers among Latinos. In New Jersey, you also had a pretty significant swing back. Two heavily Latino counties that had helped Trump get higher numbers in 2024. They swung back to the left. Those are Passaic and Cumberland counties, and they improved significantly over where Kamala Harris was in 2024 by a double-digit advantage. And so, there's definitely a swing back, and there's a repudiation of the Trump agenda. I've called it an anti-Hispanic agenda. Rafa, you're an expert on the Latino vote, and you brought it up as far as Democrats still have a long way to go. What do you take away from this as a good sign, and where do you think they still need to do more?
I mean, the good sign is like, yeah, Passaic is important. I also want to see, I haven't done the exercises going into precinct level in places like Washington Heights in New York, where some young Latino men had gravitated toward Trump in 2024. So I think the very obvious thing that we can take away from that is we're seeing Latinos who voted for Trump because he's bombastic or because he was going to bring back that 2019 economy and because he and even maybe because he was going to bring in more border security. But none of those, or very few of them, uh, voted for the kind of enforcement, interior enforcement of immigration laws that we've seen. That actually, in many cases, you know this better than I do, probably, but probably exceeds the way Congress intended those laws to be enforced. Um, Basically nobody was voting for mass men going into kindergartens and dragging out the teacher in Chicago. Like nobody voted for that. I mean, I am conceptually opposed to anything gerrymandering, but like it's sort of the whole coming from Latin America. It's just like so obvious. Like if one side starts like abusing the not cheating but like sort of abusing the spirit of the law and the other side goes like, oh, I would never do that, not on principle, you know where it's going to end up. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, exactly. I think it's in putting the results up on screen here. It did pretty well, 63.9%.
yeah,
A resounding pushback on what is political manipulation, but also a suppression of minority voters, which I think is one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough. Is
you
that
know,
in Texas, where this started, it's essentially distributing Latinos in a way where they're just not going to have much representation.
yeah, you know what I'm kind of loving about this is this whole idea that voters don't get nuance. All of these things, like the way that Prop 50 was sold, is exactly what it was. Like it's got a clause to go back to the original system for a reason, you know. Like like we
Yeah,
this is like it's political warfare and it's necessary, but it was mostly sold as that. And voters, I think, got the nuance, which is good. So that swing is sort of like the Trump effect swing back, like I think you could safely say the betrayal of Trump of those voters that he pulled away from Democrats in 2024. And you know, it was a decade long exercise of pulling them away, and he immediately betrayed them. Where Democrats have to do better is it's it's been the same story for 40 years. It's only been become more intense over the last decade, but it's you have to do more campaigning like what Ruben Gallego did in Arizona. You have to be more present on Spanish language radio, on Spanish language podcasts, on English language Latino podcasts with influencers. You just like Democrats have to be talking and make themselves familiar to these audiences that may not be that politically engaged over a long period of time and consistently over that period of time. Not just, it used to be like the cliche was like they'd send out mailers 3 weeks in advance in bad Spanish. We're better than that has improved. Now you have 3 months of ads in pretty good regional Spanish, but it's still not that presence like where Hispanics know how many Latino Democrats there are in Congress.
But
right.
Rafael, can I ask you a question on that? I mean, there is the being present. There is the, you know, retail politics and policy approach that is necessary. But on the issue, do you think affordability is just an issue that just breaks all kinds of molds, that is going to be important with Latinos, important with everybody, or do you think that they need to sort of adjust their substantive message, to to deal with what folks think Latinos want more? One of the things that Donald Trump did was that he just had a very clear message for everybody. Is he being able to keep that up now? No, because we're seeing the economy and the affordability issue questioned directly, and we're seeing it in the results. But do you think that affordability, period, is going to resonate with Latino voters?
I mean, yes, like short answer, yes. The affordability obviously takes on a lot of different. So compare Mamdani to Spanberger. Spanberger's got more of this like capitalist, pro-business message, where probably Latinos in Virginia are more concerned about their construction company or their landscaping company or their cafe, their small business. Latinos in New York are scared of being priced out of the city and not being able to go to their job because to work in a blue collar job in a Manhattan building eventually, but it's going to be like a 4 hour commute, and that's going to make no sense if rent prices keep up. So in that sense, like Mamdani and Spamberger are making the same affordability pitch to their constituents based on their constituents like immediate economic realities. So yes, it does work. I think it's just I think the message affordability is a really good way to package the message of Democrats want to keep this being the America you dreamed of, and the America like those of us who immigrated here dream of is you come here, you do your job, you pay your taxes, you get to have a house, you get to have like Gallego puts it as a troquita because he's from Arizona. You know, I wouldn't put it as a troquita, but you get to buy you get to buy your car, you get to and you get to have some luxuries that even not being a billionaire are sort of reserved for the upper crust in Latin America.
Yeah.
Or here, like you do your job and you're good.
Yeah.
You can be an amateur photographer if you want.
Well, overall, I found refreshing is that the anti-woke, the trans, all those issues that Republicans used effectively. I didn't see much of that. I don't think that message got through. I think people are over that, which is great. I mean, the it seemed very the campaign's very local to what like people in those regions want. This national like we're for you, not for them. That I think that message is gone.
Yeah, I think Democrats are handling it much better, and that they understand that getting baited on that is unnecessary. I will still say though that one of Kamala's biggest failures in the 2024 race was not pushing back on that ad that you're referencing, Jeremy, with she was for they them, because it was a law that Donald Trump himself had enforced and I believe even signed during his first term, so that they were attacking her over.
Yeah, but,
So
but that's the vulnerability, Luis. I mean, the culture war detours
mhm.
and the identity contests, and they feel so disconnected from rent and
Yeah,
childcare and utilities and affordability. I mean, if you can keep this coalition, on the cost of living sort of approach, and you can disagree on tactics with it without blowing up the tent. I mean, I'm even seeing people say, and you said something really good on a podcast yesterday with Jorge Ramos, um, about the big tent of the Democratic Party. Some people are starting to make the argument against that. They think that going the Mamdani route is the way forward for Democrats. And I just think you're drifting back to these fights that will destroy this issue on, or the focus on an issue. I think that resonates not just with Democrats, but with a center of the country,
yeah.
independents, disgruntled Republicans that would be likely to vote for Democrats.
Yeah, you said it, Baskin Robbins, right? I mean, it really is it really is the point. Like uh, I think the conversation, like the insider conversation with Democrats, is moving more and more to like what does Big Tent look like? And Big Tent, one of like the all those cultural war issues, they're third or fourth tier issues, whether the one that got Harris with trans rights or the one that frankly one of the ones that got Trump in this election, which is immigration enforcement. Like that's not the number one issue for Latinos, even though 15 or 20 years ago Democrats thought it was, and it,
Yeah.
it really was. But it's those third or fourth tier issues where if you are flat-footed or out of touch on them, like you say, like yeah, I'm cool. Like you end up being forced into corners that are not realistic, but they sound really bad. Like yeah, I'm like somebody, and this is a I'm not saying this as an example. Like, yeah, I'm cool with boys in girls' locker rooms. That's not what Democrats were ever saying. Like, that's not what anybody ever was saying. But they kind of got forced into that corner, and
Yeah.
they turned that fourth tier issue into a yes no issue for way too many voters to succeed in a national election.
And you have to be available. I think that's the other thing that this campaign shows and reminds is you have to be able to go out and take tough questions and engage the electorate, engage different types of outlets. I used to tell Barack Obama when he was president, we've got to get some of these interviews out of the way with Latino media because they're going to ask you about immigration the first time and, a part of plea on the second one. But at least once you've done that interview, then you can go back at them and talk about different issues, education, economy, healthcare. And that's what we did. You can't just show up once because then that one time you show up, you're only going to end up scratching the surface. And I think that was also part of what was evident in this campaign is that the candidates who won did the hard work. To your point, Jeremy, even dancing at a nightclub the night before the election in the Mamdani situation. Rafa, before we let you go, there's also this situation that the Senate is voting on today on a war powers resolution to block an attack on Venezuela. You've worked in Mexico also at length, and there's talk of the Trump administration potentially even carrying out operations against the cartels into Mexico. There's obviously 46 Democrats will definitely vote against this or for this, excuse me. Do you see any chance of that passing in the Senate or the Congress overall reasserting its war power authority?
I hope so. Thank you, Frank. I just hope so. And especially Congress has to be the moderating force for power authority in the hemisphere. I think Carl, you probably like you have studied this more than anyone.
Yeah.
But Venezuela is worrying for a million reasons that have been covered. But I really want to focus on the possibility of a U.S. strike, U.S. military strike within Mexico without the acquiescence or with the acquiescence of the Mexican government. Like they would put the Mexican government in a situation where if they say basically this happened, although we didn't want it to happen, then they look weak and weak in a way that's sort of um, like existential. The Mexican armed forces basically exist as like the primary like core mission in the heart. The core mission may be internal safeguarding of you know ports and railroads and whatever, but the mission really deep in their heart is to prevent any uh, U.S. incursion, like because of historical reasons. So
Right.
if Claudia Sheinbaum says like, yeah, well, I allowed this, then she has a problem with her own military. That's not good. If she says I didn't allow this, then she looks weak, like the president who, after more than 100 years, brought back U.S. intervention, and that is just an existential issue for Mexicans across the political spectrum.
And it
So
has a destabilizing effect too, right? I mean, I don't think it's good for the United States either.
oh, it's terrible for the United States. Destabilized Mexico. I mean, just during the Mexican Revolution was a disaster. Like the United States really allowed Mexico to go its own way during the Cold War because of that stability that the PRI system brought. The United States was very, very happy to have a stable Mexico after having lived the first 100 years of Mexican independence with a very unstable Mexico.
And
But
Mexico's
I think one
people,
thing we're missing is, you know, everything we're saying is rational and right, but this kind of stuff plays well to Americans because they see a president doing something about the war on drugs, especially the fentanyl crisis, the opiate crisis, and what it did to communities. And nothing seemed to be done. And now you have, GI Joe blowing up boats with drugs. I think this just visually plays to Americans because they see someone finally doing something about it.
and Jeremy, every time you bring this up, I have to push back that fentanyl is not coming from Venezuela or Colombia for that matter.
Right.
It's mostly a China/Mexico issue, and so at least in the Mexico side, there would be some legitimacy to tie it to fentanyl, But it's also important to remember that this administration has pulled federal officers and investigators off of cartel operations to do interior enforcement. So DEA guys are out there arresting moms at daycares, apparently. I don't know if they were involved in the Chicago situation. I think that was all Border Patrol, but it's an example that the rhetoric just doesn't match. And so you're right that the public sees action. The destabilization it can cause is just something else entirely. So let me also just say one last thing, Jeremy. Last week, you predicted that there might be a CNN-CBS merger. And in the days since, Vanity Fair has reported that that's actually looks like it's coming together under David Ellison.
Yep.
What do you think
Yeah.
about your prediction?
Thank you. I'm here all week.
You're here all week. All right. Well, and with that, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for listening and tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Our panel featured Louis Miranda, former Obama White House communications advisor and former spokesperson at DHS, Carl Meacham, former Clinton appointee and a former senior Republican staff on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Jeremy Murphy, former CBS executive, author, and publicist.